And thank you so much for staying with us. We're seeing all of your comments and contributions on our social media platforms. Once again, follow News Central at News Central TV. You can also, of course, join the conversation. You can watch us live on Star Times channel 274. Outside of the continent, Avo TV channel 23, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss any of our great content. We are live looking at Democracy Day 2021 in Nigeria. We've had conversations with analysts and, of course, experts and guests looking at security in Nigeria. We've also looked at politics in Nigeria. We have two more conversations to go. The next one is on the economy of the continent's largest country and the world's most populous black country as well. We will be joined by our guests who will be taking us through the economy and all related matters. So joining us, we have Duke Oputa joining us. He is live from London, joining us today now as we take a look at this. And also joining us is Zeal Akaraiwre. Duke Oputa is a policy advisor and a policy analyst, and Zeal Akaraiwre is a financial advisor. And both gentlemen are quite well known for their expertise in the area of all things economy and business. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this live broadcast.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Tolu.
So we want to set the pace of this conversation. While the conversation around democracy is not tied solely to one government or one administration, we would like to take a look at something that President Muhammadu Buhari said this morning in his speech to the nation to commemorate Democracy Day. So let's start with that. President Buhari's speech this morning. Let's see if we can get that rolling out to you.
The plan is primarily focused on the non-oil sector, which has recorded phenomenal growth, contributing over 90% to the GDP growth in the first quarter of 2021. Though marginal, we have recorded GDP growth over 2 quarters, second quarter of 2020 and first quarter of 2021. This is evidence of a successful execution of the economic sustainability plan by the federal government. My vision of pulling 100 million poor Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years has been put into action and can be seen in the National Social Investment.
So there, the president is talking about the country experiencing GDP growth over the past 2 quarters, which actually takes us out of the recession we experienced, the second in 5 years under his democratic administration. He also talked about the economic sustainability plan and his government's plan to lift millions of Nigerians out of poverty. When we look at celebrating democracy, I remember many years ago on radio, someone told me that democracy starts at breakfast. That when people find it difficult to provide their basic daily needs, you can't talk to them about democracy. Duke, let me start with you. When you hear the president say 2 consecutive quarters of GDP growth in a nation that has the highest number of people living in extreme poverty coming out of a recession, the second in 5 years, what do you think?
Well, the president is absolutely right in his assertion. We have experienced growth in the last 2 quarters. But why don't we just look at this in context? If you fell into a pit, a 40-foot pit, and then you climb up 5 feet, you're still 35 feet on the ground. If you consider that progress, then that's brilliant. But if your objective is to get above ground, then you would consider yourself as having made very little progress. The GDP growth that the president talks about in the last quarter was less than 1%. I think it was 0.5%. And that was followed by, following a previous quarter growth of about 0.1%. So the very small and very marginal growths of our GDP. But technically, of course, once your GDP is moving upwards, you are said to be out of recession. And if you are celebrating the fact that we're out of recession, that's brilliant. But if you want to celebrate the fact that our economy is taking a turn for the better, then I don't think it's a good start.
When we look at our economic stats, so gross domestic product from 2019 was $448.1 billion. GDP per capita is about $2,229 per person. GNI per capita stands at about 5,199 PPP dollars. Growth rates, GDP growth rates, about an annual 2.2. And of course, when you factor in the effects of the coronavirus, is going to be lower than that. But Zeal, I'm going to come to you now. The question has to be, for a country that has crude oil, the natural resources we have, the smart and intelligent people that Nigerians are, why is the Nigerian economy so bad?
Tolu, that's a leading question, but I like it. Simply put, our economy is the way it is because we're non-productive. When I say non-productive, I don't mean our production level is zero, but I like what Jude said. There's a certain level of productivity that we need to maintain status quo, and then a different level of productivity that we need to actually grow. What we are doing is we're producing, but we're producing at a volume far less than what will maintain status quo and already suboptimal. So our economy is bad. If I were to point at one thing, it's because we are non-productive. And non-productive is the same thing in this context as our inability to process raw materials. Doesn't matter whether the raw material is crude oil or yam or tomatoes or human resources. The point is, whatever we produce in its raw form, we add value to it so that it can have a multiplier effect. And so what we do with crude oil, for example, is that we extract the raw material, add absolutely no value, and then sell it. Turn around when another added value to it by creating jobs for it, jobs increase the economy's output and generate taxes for the economy, and those jobs, standard of living of the people, after the raw material for other people to benefit. We turn around and then use as, and then buy it back more expensive. If you run that model, what I call then it becomes impossible for the nation to grow. I think in summary, that's it. We are not process anything. We produce largest producer of cassava in the world, I think, at least in Africa. We import ethanol. We're the producer of crude. We import petrol, all the derivatives of crude. We have the highest human resource in Africa. We do not have an educational quality that allows us. So in summary, all of what we're suffering is our inability to think in the long term, to invest in processing the raw materials we have.
Now, I'd like to bring in Duke here. It's said that the greatest resource a country has is its people. We look at countries like Singapore, that was seen as a backwater. We look at Taiwan. We look at Switzerland, that have zero natural resources, but they've been able to harness the human resources there. This year marks the 62nd year since independence, and the conversation is still the same. When is this sleeping giant going to wake up to its full potential? In the barest and easiest way you could put it, what do we need to do to get things right economically?
Well, I think the most important thing is for us to understand the fundamentals that drive economic growth, or indeed just drive the economy in general. You pointed out the most important resource that any economy actually needs is people. I mean, the economy is about people. It's about creating and distributing goods and services to people. Without people, there's no economy. And consequently, if you have people, you can grow an economy. If you look at the world economy as a whole, if you think of the earth, the world as it is, as one unit, think about it. Is there anything that we put into our economic activity, whether it's services or goods, anything at all that is not created by man? We create the whole lot. machines are created by man. All we need is people with heads to think about how to use the resources that we have, dig them out from the ground or grow them in farms. Everything that we grow, everything that we dig out, we turn into metals, rubber, and intellectual property, and then we put it together, and that creates the services and the goods that we need. It creates aircraft, it creates cinemas, it creates music, it does all of these things. So if in a macro sense, the world economy can do that, so can any individual economy. And that is what individual economies have done. That is why Western Europe and America are economically very advanced, because they've been able to use these resources, put them together to create the services and the goods that they need. As my friend just pointed out, sorry, I forget your name. We haven't done that in Nigeria. Yeah, we haven't done that in Nigeria at all. We do have the resources, we do have the people, but we haven't put it together. It's like an algorithm, and parts of it are missing. And most of that is down to policy. It is policy that creates distance. Let's start with money. You need money to be able to join people and resources together to create services and goods. Nigeria has no money. In the context of the economy, our government is absolutely broke. Nigerians might have money, the government doesn't have money. Everybody talks about oil. Oil seems to be the linchpin of our economic planning, everything we do. But we forget that oil accounts for less than 15% of Nigeria's economy. We sell $39-40 billion of oil every year, but the Nigerian economy is well over $450 billion. So it is less than 10% of Nigerian economy. So why is the government fixated on 10% of the economy when they can actually harness the resources that the other 90% can provide? They haven't done that. And that is why you have decline in agriculture, decline in services, decline in manufacturing over the last 10 years in the country, and it was so over the last 12 months as a result of COVID. So my prescription would be that our economic think tank needs to get back to the drawing table and begin to understand our economy, begin to look at where the government can have an input into restructuring that economy. And the first stage, I believe, is growing government revenue. Where we are at the moment in terms of our economic decline as a result of COVID can only be salvaged with government expenditure, with injection of money into the economy. But the government doesn't have that money to inject to the economy. But Nigerians do have that money to inject. Not every Nigerian, don't get me wrong. The vast majority of Nigerians are still extremely poor. But there's a small number of Nigerians, small in the context of the nation, maybe 200,000-300,000 Nigerians, maybe even 1 million Nigerians at the top of the economic tree, who are making money, doing very productive activities across the economy, but contributing nothing to the center in terms of, for instance, taxation. It's a big issue. Even as we speak, the G7 meeting in the UK is fast, moving towards recognizing the need to bring taxation among the richest people in the world as a forefront of economic, revitalization over the next few years. So we need to do the same thing in Nigeria. The government needs to look at the tax situation. It's not about creating new taxes. I'm not asking or suggesting that new taxes should be created. I'm merely suggesting that existing tax laws be made effective. 24% is the rate of taxation that the economy is geared for. And if you even achieved half of that out of 400 million, that will give you 3 or 4 times current government revenue. And that becomes the starting point for now injecting that money into the areas that will stimulate the economy: agriculture, services, and creating employment for young people, which is very important.
All right. So, Duke, you talk about injecting money, and you also talk about in the same sentence the fact that Nigeria does not have this money to inject. It's something that I know Zeal has spoken about. But we also spoke to Professor Patutomi, and that conversation was on the loans and Nigeria's debt profile. We've seen with this government an attempt to get some money in some form or fashion from loans for infrastructural development projects that are supposed to help the economy. Let's hear what Professor Patutomi said, and then we'll come back and take a look at his points.
Fundamental point, and put out a caveat. Debt itself is not a terrible thing. It just depends on what you do with it. Anybody who is borrowing is an extremely frugal person if they want to come out of it with the wins that borrowing can bring you. Does Nigeria look to you like a frugal country? President and his jets flying in one direction, vice president and his own jet in one direction, Senate president one direction, even deputy Senate president, everybody's governors all in chartered planes, and state governments are buying aeroplanes. It just shows you that we have a profligate political class that does not understand financial management, does not understand prudence, and is piling up trouble for the next generation. If you borrow money to create productive opportunities, you will earn enough to pay off the debt, you can amortize the commitments that you have made. Unfortunately, we're borrowing to pay salaries. We're borrowing to make politicians more comfortable, allow them to fly around. That is a travesty. And generations will curse these times because we are piling up for them debts that we're not giving them the infrastructure, the education that they will use to produce. And it's based on the fact that the thinking of today's Nigerian politician, productive asset base, so that you can derive a dividend that will enable you.
And so we've heard from Professor Patutomi. He says there's a profligate economic or political class right now. Debt in and of itself is not a bad thing, but we're not providing the next generation with the resources to pay for that debt. Zeal, you talked about the inability for Nigeria to think in the long term. And hearing from what Professor Patutomi said, in terms of debt, Nigeria's debt profile right now is at the highest it's ever been. Debt servicing, a lot of people say it goes towards recurrent expenditure and paying salaries, as he also mentioned. How do we have this conversation? Every country borrows to a certain extent. It's not that debt in and of itself is bad, but it's how Nigeria is either structuring the debt or what Nigeria is using the debt for. Where is the way out of this conversation so that generations of Nigerians are not stuck in a debt trap?
Okay, so I agree with what Tommy said, and it's absolutely correct. That, there was something being, I agree with it, that the most important resource in nation people, but that has been amended. Most important resource a nation has is an education. And that's something, because if we don't add the word education there, invest, we don't see education as infrastructure. We see education as, God knows, maybe a benefit, or maybe, whenever we hear our government talking of infrastructure bridges, they don't realize that teacher infrastructure and teaching aids. Question, Tolu. Our debt service to revenue ratio, which is what any government should be looking at. Debt to GDP ratio, which is the most useless ratio to look at. GDP does not pay debt, it's revenue. So if you look at our to revenue ratio, I remember in the first quarter, Minister of Finance, in talking about government, placed that ratio at over 90%. it is important to continue on a borrowing spree, service to revenue ratio anywhere above 40%, and we're 3 times that. So you ask what the solution is, and what I say use is that if you're using a basket water, increasing the flow of water does not increase the amount of water you collect. In terms of revenues, there is so much slippage, wastage, theft. Even if each and every Nigerian put their personal resource into the government basket, it will all leak out. So let's start with plugging those holes. Does the country need money? Do we have it? Where I is that the money exists, the money exists in the right account holders. A lot of money is wasted, stolen, there is slippage. We need to, first of all, plug all of those leakages. And when the government talks about tax being low, we need to understand that when the government uses the word tax and when a citizen uses the word tax, they don't mean the same thing. And I'll give an example. I pay my Eco Disco bills, and that is not tax. But as a citizen, that is money leaving me. I also run a generator. And as far as I'm concerned as a citizen, the cost of power is the cost of running my generator and the cost of my power bills. But guess what? None of that goes to the government. But as a citizen, I feel that is a tax. And I'm using the word feel. The same way, when you go to Lagos Island and you park, somebody takes money for you for parking. That money doesn't. But as far as I'm concerned, as a citizen, when I accumulate all of the resource leaving me for my comfort, that will end up in government, but it should. As far as I am concerned as a citizen, that is the same taxation. Unfortunately, on the government end, most of it does not get to them. And that money does not get to them out of their own inefficiency and lack of proper policy drive. So we need to understand the context of the slippage. There's a lot of money the government leaves on the table that should go to them. And that is something they need to understand. And that is something that the government itself needs to sit down with highly educated people, not the type of people they've surrounded themselves with, to sit down and design a solution that works in this environment. Our copy and paste attitude, our copy and paste philosophy has not gotten us very far. There's a lot of ingenuity that we can deploy locally that will make a massive difference. The economic theories work, we distort them and then turn around to say they do not work. They all work. If we had our refineries working, we spend $10 to $15 billion of scarce resources every year importing petroleum-related products that we should be producing. If our refineries were working, for example, we would be saving on the import $10 to $15 billion. I'm not adding all the ancillary things that we would get around the power generation, around the gas utilization, around the raise. I'm talking about the ancillary industries, production, and the ingenuity that's going to come off. I'm not even counting that. I'm just counting the raw cash we pay out per year to import what we have failed to produce. Don't have money as a nation, as a country, but that most of it is leaking. If we want to start this journey by getting not just in confidence, but getting citizen confidence, should a citizen more tax when he knows is going to be used for as far as the citizen's life standard of living is concerned. So the government has to significant amount of responsibility blocking those leakages, and then we will have in the coffers of government.
Okay, just before we start winding things down here, I'd like to ask Duke this question. It said that SMEs, small and medium-scale businesses, at the background of the Nigerian economy. They are the highest employers of labor, and there's a whole generation of Nigerians that are depending on government handouts and social intervention programs. They just want an enabling environment to thrive and contribute their quota to the economy. In what ways can the government harness this brilliant minds and this millions of Nigerians that just want to go about their business and contribute their quota to the growth of the nation?
Yes, I believe that the state governments are really the best people that are in a position to do something about economic growth at that level, at the small and medium enterprise level. Enabling environments, as you say, is the key thing, and power comes to the forefront of it. Most industries, most businesses depend on electricity power to be able to operate at an efficient level. When you have to run generators and buy fuel, it really does eat into your margins, and more importantly, requires substantially more capital outlay to even get started. So what I'd like to see is something that I believe has been muted in the Federal House recently, which is an initiative for local governments to be empowered by being given their rightful allocations as per the Constitution. I think the federal legislature needs to start looking at ways of forcing, and the word here is forcing state governors to pass allocations down to local governments. And then the local government should be encouraged to spend most of these allocations in capital expenditure, especially in providing workspaces for young people. One of the biggest bottlenecks for small businesses is a workspace. If you wanted to start a small business, no matter how small it is, the first thing you need is premises. And as we know, the Nigerian economic culture, or if you like, a commercial, is for landlords to demand substantial amounts of money upfront before you can move into any premises. So you're looking to pay 2 or 3 years in some cases to move into a small space to start a business. There's no reason why workspaces should not be affordable, or even, if possible, even given on a deferred payment basis by local governments by building small industrial and trading estates in local governments in the 2 or 3 or 4 locations in each local government. That is the very first start. Give young people and small businesses an opportunity to enter into that business in the first instance. And then, all these monies that the federal government are dishing out in one way or the other, this money, that money, trade money, and so on, they should be concentrated in providing loans, possibly through cooperatives, to people who are willing to set up businesses and register these businesses into the system so that we can monitor what is happening and what results we're getting from the investments that we're making. So it's a question of resources again. And can I just add that from what Zeal said, absolutely right. At the end of the day, we don't have money, or people do have money and don't want to give it to the government. But let's just point out one thing, and let's be very straight and honest about it.
All right.
Tax is an obligation. It's not something. Sorry.
No, just finish your sentence very quickly.
We have an obligation. Yeah, we have an obligation to fund our government. It's not voluntary. It's not something we do because government doesn't work or doesn't work. It's something you do because the law says that we do that. And we must bear that in mind when we think about funding the Nigerian government. All
right. Unfortunately, we don't have time to take more, but in adding context to this, there is, of course, the Nigerian factor in all the conversations for politics, the economy, and security. And we will keep those conversations happening right here on News Central. Let's say a very big thank you to Duke Oputa, policy analyst, as well as Zeal Akaraiwre, financial advisor, for joining us on this session where we're looking at Nigeria's economic assessment as the country marks Democracy Day 2021. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today.